I said that we'll begin everything with every week. We'll start with a little Torah from Rav Tzuriel. Yom Kippur is coming. Recently, in light of apparent medical science, research, and compilation of statistics, in the last 2 decades, Rabbi Rabinovich, Rabbi Yisrael Yaakov Fisher, and after them, Rav Tzuriel, published major kulas, major leniencies regarding women fasting, specifically women who are pregnant and women who are nursing. For pregnancy, because they realized that even though the Shulchan Aruch, following the Gemara, is pretty machmir with regards to pregnant and nursing women on Yom Kippur, that they also have to fast, apparently, according to the research they found, it was causing women to sometimes go into labor when they really aren't supposed to, especially early, and cause other complications. So it's not worth it. So they should not fast, and they should do it in fewer. And Rav Tzuriel certainly believed as such. The only question was, which pregnant women, which nursing women? Some were machmir, it has to be pretty advanced, like the second half of the pregnancy. I know this isn't much of relevant to you unmarried fellows, but certainly for many of us, this is something that's relevant, at least every few years. So this is something that needs to be said. Rav Tzuriel was very makel in this regard. Said if the sages had known of this also, they would have likewise done it. In the olden days, by the way, society was different. How do we treat pregnancy? It wasn't that only Frummy families have upwards of 4 children per family, going on a dozen kids per family, thank God. It used to be everybody, even the most secular Gentiles, attempted to have as many children as possible because many pregnancies just ended on their own. Yeah. Many child mortality and infant mortality was very high. You'd hope that if a woman was, active, okay, reproductively active from her late teens, and was part of that, had a stable husband, then they would hope that they would have quite a few pregnancies. Maybe a few kids would make it to adulthood. Okay, and that was the way human society throughout the world basically went until the modern era, when we had medicine and hygiene, and now most children have a good chance to live. And instead, you see it that other people don't have large families, not because of these problems, but because they're specifically preventing themselves from having many children, with advances also in birth control. So this is something that's important. It's important to publicize Rav Tzuriel's opinion, and I don't know why earlier today it made me very emotional thinking about it, because I still get emotional with thinking about how we've lost such a big tragedy that Rav Tzuriel isn't here anymore. He was so clear on everything. So I guess it made me emotional. And then what else made me emotional was seeing something that came up from Rabbi, I don't know how to pronounce his name properly, especially if I anglicize it, Rabbi Dinar, or he spells in Hebrew Dalid Yud Nun Resh. I think when I spoke to him, I called him Rabbi Dinner, because I guess it's obviously not a Hebrew name, but now he lives in Bnei Brak. And he was also, like Rabbi Devere, putting out material regarding how to conduct Korban Pesach. He had a Haggadah that basically shows what to do in the temple for Korban Pesach. Of course, there's what I could have argued with him. And then he put out a Haggadah also that has an attempt at a service. I still consider mine the best and most refined. Okay, and I even argued some points with him. I think I have a correspondence with him in the email, the YouTube, not the WhatsApp, and the emails about that. So he's a very inspired individual. He's really looking forward. So something he put out recently was, get this, a new calendar. What's new about the calendar? So the first thing I saw about the calendar said, what made me emotional today? He put out a calendar, Zmanim, for when you conduct the temple service, every day of the coming year. And he says basically what time of the morning will be Trumas Hadeshen, down to the minute. Okay, Trumas Hadeshen at 4:41 a.m. Okay, Shchitas Atamid at this time. If there's a Musaf, what time are they doing Musaf? What time to bring the Tamid Shilbin Bar-Hayim? What time is Ne'ilah? What is Ne'ilah? That's when the Anshe Maimid would pray Ne'ilah every day. What time is the first Ashmores over? What time is the second Ashmores over? It's very nice. It's really looking forward. And then he published the schedule based on the weeks of the year and the corresponding parshas according to the usual annual cycle, which Kohanic and Levitic watches will be on duty. His suggestion, Yehoyariv and what is it? Some of the other names that are there in Sefer Divrei Yomim. The Kohanic watches were a well-known piece of Jewish history. The Kohanic families had been established even at the beginning. You're wondering, why is it Sefer Bamidbar? It divides all the tribes into families. We saw, what's the nafkamina, that the Shevet Reuven was divided into a certain number of families, and Shevet Yehuda was divided into certain families with names. We explained, my proposal was the tribes that had many more families got more land. That's what it says. Menashe has the most families, so Menashe got the most land. And Dan, even though being a much larger than average tribe, had but one family, so he didn't get a lot of land. It was divided by families. But why are the Levium and the Kohanim divided into families? Because they have to get Kohanic cities. And even as late as after the destruction of the temple, these Kohanic families lived separately. There was Ari Kahuna and Ari Levia have been a fact of Jewish life forever. So this thing they had. So that, just reading over his schedule on these things and looking at it today, well, wow, that really put me in a Yomim Noraim mood. Okay, so I got really emotional about that. And then I saw his calendar, which he says, based on all these different shitas, here's the set calendar, the day of every of the coming year, which is basically set because of our current calendar. And then he says, but if we go back to a Sanhedrin that will establish the months based on the testimony of the witnesses, we know when the moon will become visible well into the future, basically forever into the future. It can be calculated now thanks to modern technology. And you could basically see, well, let's say if sometime in February, the new moon of Adar Sheni will show up on a certain day in February at this time, and it will be visible in Jerusalem when. So we could say that what day will the Sanhedrin actually establish Rosh Chodesh based on the actual testimony when the moon will be sighted? So there's some discrepancies, and of course there's Machlokas Rishonim. So he basically stuck with Rambam as the main opinion there in one of his calendars. Says, let's work with the Rambam. Rambam one calendar, one column in the main calendar, but then he has Rambam as the main sheet in the other calendar, just to keep it simple. And he sees there's some divergence there. So there's a certain point in the year also where basically the true calendar, based on the sighting of the new moon and the witnesses, will be behind the set calendar by 2 days. They'll be celebrating, for example, Lamed Kislev, and for us it'll be Kaf Ches Kislev, something like that, and then it'll almost fall into whack. But one of the things I saw that he had, according to the Rambam, was that apparently, if you're doing a non-set calendar, Lo Adu Rosh is no longer a rule. Okay, that is certainly acceptable, because the Rambam says when you do a set calendar, Lo Adu Rosh, implying, like many statements that the Rambam brings from the Gemara. When, for example, Yom Kippur is Erev Shabbos, the Rambam talks about when Yom Kippur is Erev Shabbos, or when this happens. Wait, but that can happen according to our calendar. Yeah, the Rambam's already saying it was this way, and it will return to that way. Okay, that's acceptable. However, one of the things that he showed, and I think that if I'll call him up, I'll argue this with him, is, for example, the Chazal tried to make sure that the Adar before Nisan is always a chaser. Nowadays, we always have it. The set calendar has it almost alternating. 29 days, 30 days, 29 days, 30 days. Malei chaser, Malei chaser. There are exceptions. And there's also rules about those exceptions. But if you use Al Pi Re'iyah, it'll be basically half the time it's Malei, half the time it's chaser. But how exactly it works out, that depends on a lot more factors. What he had in this calendar was that both Adars were chaser. Okay, I can entertain that. Normally, Adar Rishon is Malei, Adar Sheni is chaser, or Stam Adar is chaser. But he also had that Elul will be Malei. And that's one of the things that we were discussing earlier that Chazal tried to avoid. Even when they were doing the system, they worked it out somehow months in advance that they knew when the molad of Rosh Hashanah would show up. That is, they knew when the new moon of Rosh Hashanah would be visible, and when the witnesses were likely to come and testify as the new moon of Rosh Hashanah. So they made it that they were already conspiring months in advance, or perhaps even years in advance, to make sure that Elul was 29 days long. Why? So that people can bank on the fact that they knew when at least Elul started, the people far away. So more often than not, Elul would just be 29 days, and the 30th day thereof would be Rosh Hashanah. That's what they used to do. And there's a hyperbolic statement if you place the Gemara that we never had an Elul that wasn't 29 days. But then the whole shita of the Rif that the rabbi is basically trying to put into the dustbin of history is that sometimes Elul did end up 30 days. And they had to keep Rosh Hashanah the next day. So it was, in essence, a 2-day Rosh Hashanah. So that's a precedent for still keeping 2-day Rosh Hashanah. And the same thing with that Adar before Nisan. They always wanted to make it 29 days. So I'm surprised that he put out this calendar just now. I think I would, if I could read you the calculation, I think it's a simple one you could do. And I'm sure people who know math better than me, they're like my friend says, there are 3 types of people in this world: those who can do math and those who can't. So those who can do math gooder than me, then they can work this out, that they know when that new moon of Rosh Hashanah, of Tishrei, should show up, Tavshin Pei Hey. So they could work it out that, Chazal would have conspired to make the months work out before that. One of the major tools at their disposal was iyum, intimidation. Nowadays, iyum is threats, threatening. They would, Ma'imim says that they knew the witnesses were going to come, and they're going to testify, hey, we saw the new moon. Today is not the 30th of the outgoing month. Today is the 1st of the incoming month. So Chazal already they wanted today, no, it's still 30. It's not Rosh Chodesh. We're going to make it that it's still the previous month. So Chazal would do a thing like that. That was one of the tools they had at their disposal. So I believe that if we go back to doing like Chazal, if we become the Chazal again, then this is something that would happen. So that's a minor issue. And the last thing is to conclude something I was discussing before about the Rosh Hashanah sounding of the shofar. This is a rerun from some people listening. Basically, Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Ben Yochai, there in the Yerushalmi, the sugya that we saw, gives a reason for keeping, for sounding the shofar specifically in the temple on Shabbos, but not anywhere else. That the mitzvah is unique to the temple. That's what Bar-Hayim sheet is also. And I was pointing out, I don't think that's what the Yerushalmi was trying to say. Why? Because that statement of Rashbi is explaining the original question that Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan had, which talked about the inconsistency of the rule. Why is it that if you're not supposed to sound the shofar Rosh Hashanah, there's an exception made for the temple? If you're supposed to sound the shofar, so everywhere, and if not, nowhere. Why is there an exception made for temple? What's this rule based on? So he says that there's a sort of a drasha that implies that you could sound the shofar in the temple, making it unique to the temple. And the Gemara seems to work with that. There's an ensuing discussion. That's fine, but it doesn't reflect the bottom line of the Mishnah. That reflects the reality when the temple is standing. But the Mishnah also says, now the temple's not standing, it's a new reality. We follow Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's Takana. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's Takana certainly is not based on this drasha of the Rashbi. Rashbi is talking about the uniqueness of the temple. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is talking about the uniqueness of the court, whatever that may be. So it just doesn't fit with what's now. I would agree that perhaps we should rebuild the temple and have the Sanhedrin stationed at the temple, and then we could go back to discussing that. But then again, if you had a Sanhedrin stationed at the temple, the Sanhedrin would make the rules and make new drushas. They wouldn't have to follow necessarily previous drushas or precedent. That's the amazing thing about a Sanhedrin. A Sanhedrin that's great in number and wisdom can override precedent, which is saying that not part of our current system. So that's why I didn't do it also, because it brings Rashbi's drasha opens up a Pandora's box for allowing us not to keep certain mitzvahs. For example, he says there, in the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, this month, that's when you have Yom Teruah. And then it continues, Allah, and you shall make a burnt offering. So it connects the mitzvah of Teruah, Yom Teruah Yelachem. So he says, V'asithem olah, this commandment to sound the shofar, the Teruah, is where the temple, where the olah, the burnt offering, is offered. That's a good connection. But 2 parshas before that it says, Uvachodesh harishon ba'arba'asar yom lachodesh pesach la'Hashem. On the 14th day of the 1st month is Passover to the Lord. That means offer the Passover sacrifice. Uvahamishaasar yom lachodesh as a chag, shivat yamim matzot yachil. And on the 15th day thereof, there is what? Festival. 7 days, eat matzah. Matzahs should be eaten. Matzot ye'ochel. Wait, matzot is plural feminine. Ye'ochel is singular masculine. So matzot is also an adjective. Matzot means your bread should be eaten unleavened. Matzot, shall your bread be eaten. Okay? Fine. And then it says, first day is a holy convocation, means a yontif. Don't do malacha. And you shall bring fire offering to the Lord your God. Okay, just to your Lord. Wait a minute. Does that mean that the mitzvah right here we just said? I understand Pesach has to be specifically in the temple because it says that in a few places. Okay, Only Pesach in the temple. But here it says the mitzvah of matzah. 7 days you should be eating matzah. That's a mitzvah. It's a gram, a furish. The mitzvah of eating matzah continues all 7 days of the festival. Are you telling me that the mitzvah of eating matzah is specific or unique to the temple in some way? Which is against what we rule. We say the mitzvah of eating matzah is a d'oraisa everywhere, in all times and places. It's across the board. The next one. On the day of the first fruits, when you bring a new meal offering to the Lord, on your Shavuotechem, it says Mincha Chadashah Hashem b'Shavuotechem, in your weeks. What does that mean? We'll explain that in a second. It should be a holy convocation. And that says Bikraftem Olah. Are you telling me that it's connecting what mitzvah? Well, Bikurim, that's the first fruits. Those do go to the temple. Mincha Chadashah Hashem is described in Vayikra and Emor. The Shtei Alechem. That's also called Bikurim. Fine. B'Shavuotechem. What's B'Shavuotechem mean? The day you conclude the counting of the Omer. And the Rambam holds, by the way, counting of the Omer is D'oraisa, all times and places. Are you trying to tell me here against the Rambam? Yeah, there are those who hold that counting the Omer is the Rabbanah nowadays. Why? Because you connect the counting of Omer with Shavuot, they connect to the temple service. If Rashbi is correct, so this would be a proof, I guess, to the position that counting the Omer is just a D'Rabbanan nowadays because there's no temple. But the Rambam holds it is a D'oraisa nowadays. Rav Bar-Hayim said it's probably D'Rabbanan. The Rambam's maybe not, the halacha doesn't follow him, but Rav Tzuriel, we can mention him again, said no, the Lashon of the Gemara is implying that it was just one Amora said that it's D'Rabbanan. Omar, it's D'Rabbanan. He said it's D'Rabbanan, but we held that it's D'oraisa, which is why the Rambam holds D'oraisa. So this, I think, at least doesn't work with the Rambam, because counting the Omer is always a mitzvah, and it's not specifically connected to the temple service. And the next thing about celebrating Sukkoth for 7 days. It says Sukkoth, like we said last week, the unique mitzvah of Sukkoth is just to be happy, just the celebration, right? Vayisa ach sameach. And that's also connected to the Korban Musaf. Are you telling me that the celebration of Sukkoth is something that's uniquely limited to the temple? I know that in the temple it's extra special, but is it uniquely limited like Shofar? So I don't think that's why. For example, all the Rishonim who actually made rulings based on the Talmud regarding how the shofar is to be done or not done on Shabbat, on Rosh Hashanah, did not take Rashbi into account at all. None of those opinions mentioned it. The Gra didn't. The Gra tells you look at the Rif, Rosh, Rashi, and Tur, and then the Rambam and those who follow the Rambam, and none of them hold like Rashbi, because, like I said, Rashbi's opinion does not account for Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's takana, which is what's governing us today, as long as there's no temple.